How do historical changes to the world's population contribute to social problems? What are the impacts of demographic changes, population growth, and technology on the environment? What about the changes to the natural environment? How has climate change fundamentally changed the social structure? On this episode, we're talking all about populations, population shifts, and social problems related to the environment. So sit back, grab a snack, and let's get at it. This week's material introduces the topic of populations and environmental problems, and the challenges that societies face in managing both effectively. The world population has changed over time, with the most rapid population growth occurring in modern times. The demographic transition model can be used to explain population growth. This model illustrates that the shift in a population or society through a series of stages from high birth and high death rates to low birth and low death rates. The human population affects our natural environment, or the natural processes that affect us as animals, like land, fertility, soil nutrients, water, and the sun. The world's population has unfolded in two main stages. The first was a long, extended period of slow growth from the time humans first appeared to the mid-1700s. The second was a brief period of explosive growth after the mid-1700s. But the issue of population growth has nearly resolved itself through demographic transition. Economist Thomas Malthus was one of the early thinkers on population growth, and he developed the idea that a population growing exponentially at a constant rate adds more people every year than the year before. Malthus was concerned about the populations outgrowing the food supply, so he reasoned that positive checks like famine, pestilence, and disease would prevent overpopulation by increasing the death rate. Conversely, preventative checks like abortion, infanticide, delayed marriage, and etc. limit the number of live births. So as you can probably tell, this theory has been critiqued from a number of angles. Perhaps the most striking critique is that if you follow the Malthusian perspective, you accept that so-called checks like famine, infanticide, and disease are functional in that they make sure there's an equilibrium between food and the population. But as I hope we fully acknowledge at this point in the course, any such checks do not and never have impacted the global population equitably. Some folks who are already living in very, very challenging and harmful conditions will be most impacted, while others who exist in privileged geographic locations or have resources at their disposal will be more likely to survive. Indeed, other thinkers believe that the largest problem facing humanity is population density, or the number of people who live in a certain geographical area, most often resulting from urbanization. Urbanization is defined as the growth in the proportion of population living in urbanized areas. There is also an increasing appearance in rural and small town areas of behavior patterns and cultural values associated with big city life. And with the rise of urbanization, cities have experienced various forms of gentrification that negatively impact vulnerable communities within city cores. Gentrification is the restoration and so-called upgrading of deteriorating urban property by middle-class or affluent people, often resulting in displacement of lower-income people. Gentrification is often viewed by cities as a social policy to so-called revitalize communities, but also has the effect of displacing folks who suffer from economic, food, or housing insecurity, drug and alcohol addiction, job insecurity, or any number of things that make them dependent upon the city for social resources. This, in and of itself, produces and reproduces social inequality. As a general rule, growth in population density has increased with economic development. The increase in inflation-adjusted market value of the goods and services produced by an economy over a period of time. Other problems with cities include the loss of what is called a Gemeinschaft, or the social relationships based on close ties, which sociologist Ferdinand Tönnies famously saw as the characteristics of a typical rural community. By contrast, Tonys believed that cities exhibited Gesellschaft, or relationships that are impersonal, fleeting, and brief. To further complicate the matter, the rise of suburbanization has blurred the lines between cities and rural communities. Suburbanization is the process where lower density housing spreads into once rural regions surrounding the city core. It is the process by which housing spreads almost unhindered into once rural regions surrounding cities. This greatly expands the geographical size of cities and takes out of production valuable agricultural land, and there is a noticeable shift of the affluent out of the urban center into surrounding areas. Similar to Tony's, Emil Durkheim labeled the tight-knit, homogeneous social order of the rural society mechanical solidarity, and the independent rather than intimate relationships of the industrial society organic solidarity. Remember that mechanical solidarity is Durkheim's term for the tight, homogeneous social order typical of pre-industrial, primarily rural societies, whereas organic solidarity is the term for a new social order of industrial society, which was based on interdependent, though not necessarily intimate, relationships. Individualism is the belief in the primary importance of the individual and the need to protect individual liberty and choice against collective social or government restriction. And due to the rise of individualism, modern society, for Durkheim, would be characterized by its formation around organic solidarity. Populations inevitably affect the natural environment, which is characterized by all the natural processes that affect us as animals. The cornucopia view of nature supports the idea that nature exists solely to store resources that are necessary for human life. It's that nature is seen as an endless storehouse of resources that exist only for use by humans, especially by those currently living. In this sense, it is an inherently colonial perspective on the relationship between people and the natural environment. It is a perspective that suggests that people are at the center of the universe and matter more than any other being, that the earth and its resources are for people and only people. Another perspective on the relationship between humans and the natural environment is called the growth ethic. The growth ethic celebrates the ability of technology to solve all of the world's problems. It's a cultural or subcultural commitment to the idea that economic growth is good in itself, whatever its social effects. So long as we indulge in the invention, production, and consumption of new items, our world will improve. The concept of individualism promotes the individual's needs and desires over that of the collective community. This leads to the tragedy of the commons, or the idea that market-based economies work best when left alone, even if this results in excessive exploitation of natural resources. It is a market system based on the capitalist belief that economies work best when left completely and solely alone. With each self-interested actor seeking what is personally best, it may work against the common good by polluting, destroying, and exhausting common goods that are not owned by a single individual, but are shared by all of us. Goods such as bodies of water, the air, the land, ecosystems, and especially renewable resources such as fish and forests. In your read, watch, and respond, please answer the following questions. What is the cornucopian view of nature? How does this perspective fit within a structural functionalist lens? And most importantly, what are some of the social problems associated with this view? In the ongoing transition from what is called the Holocene, or the period or epoch of geological development from the Ice Age to about now, and characterized by rapid proliferation, growth, and impacts of the human species across the globe, and whereby human development has been impacted by the environment, to what some call the Anthropocene, a current or soon-to-be geological epoch, where the human impact on Earth's geology and ecosystems is more than the Earth's impact on humans. This period includes, but is certainly not limited to, anthropogenic climate change. Climate change, a fact of life, is defined as an empirically observable departure from expected patterns of temperature and other climatic properties resulting mainly from the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, trapping the heat reflecting off the Earth's surface. Climate change includes global warming, which is defined as the gradual increase in the overall temperature of the Earth's atmosphere and is most often caused by a process known as the greenhouse effect, where greenhouse gases such as CFCs, carbon dioxide, and methane accumulate in the atmosphere, trapping the heat that reflects off the Earth's surface. Beyond individuals, companies also exploit ecologically conscious shoppers by what's called greenwashing, or the process of pretending that their products are more ecologically friendly than they really are. It is the process of promoting false ideas about the environmental friendliness of a certain commercial product. A clear example of this is when you buy new electronics that have a label that suggests they're made up of, say, 98% recyclable materials, or that the packaging is quote-unquote 100% green. These often hide the manufacturing processes or the exterior packaging like plastic wrap that go into producing products. For example, you may recall that Apple stopped shipping charging adapters with the iPhone 12 in 2020. While they suggested this is part of their commitment to reducing carbon waste, which may or may not be true, it is also likely motivated by another kind of green, by money. Less packaging, fewer materials, no charging bricks, all reduce costs. But has the cost of the iPhone decreased? And moreover, Apple has a really poor track record with exploiting the Earth's resources and negatively contributing to carbon emissions in their production processes, relying heavily on fossil fuels and on labor in regions that disproportionately contribute to greenhouse gases due to lax legal regulations on emissions. There are a variety of theoretical perspectives on populations and their effect on the natural environment. Structural functionalists, for instance, sometimes view social problems of urbanization as resulting naturally from growth and specialization in society. Too rapid urban growth produces disorganization, crowding, and stress on the social system. For example, more wealth in cities typically means more crime, as higher density leads to more intense competition for resources. And since pre-industrialization societies were mainly small, rural settlements, in which members shared similar values, norms, and identities, urbanization, which is part of the proper functioning of contemporary societies, leads to a host of new problems that range from cultural conflicts to resource distribution. Functionalists also posit that modern values and activities contribute to the pollution of our natural surroundings and harvesting of resources. These things, however, are part of the social evolution process, and we can use technology and the natural environment to ease those issues. They result so-called naturally from population growth, from density and specialization. This then has a new impact on global warming, climate change, etc. Conflict theories attribute urban problems like homelessness, crime, or poverty, and so on, not to the effects of size, variety, and fluidity that structural functionalists would, but to the fundamental conditions of advanced capitalism. Cities, for instance, suffer problems because it is in no powerful group's interest to prevent them. Conflict theorists most often maintain that solving problems of urbanization will require more than simply addressing economic stagnation, but restructuring the entire system of capitalism. Conflict theorists view environmental problems as an issue of social inequality that hurts the poor much more and much more severely than the rich. The solution to environmental problems is the distribution of wealth, and collective action by the underclass is needed to gain political attention to their needs. The wealthy are able to remove themselves physically from an area once a disaster occurs. For example, we know that Hurricane Katrina disproportionately impacted racialized groups and those who suffer from economic insecurity. At the structural level, we also see rich countries like Canada buying carbon credits in order to disproportionately contribute to climate change via carbon emissions. Symbolic interactionists, as you should know by now, study the ways in which people experience urban life on an everyday basis. How does the meaning of city life vary amongst groups and subcultures? How do folks understand their place in the city relative to the rest of the world? For symbolic interactionists, cities are not undifferentiated masses of people, but neighborhoods containing distinct and fluid subcultures. Symbolic interactionists also study how meanings and labels affect environmental problems and alter one's perceptions of these problems. How do environmental issues initiate meaning? How are environmental issues labeled or not labeled as social problems? How do we understand them? Interactionists are among those most interested in how we greenwash our environmental damage at both the individual and organizational levels. In your read, watch, and respond, please answer the following questions. What does it mean to socially construct environmental problems? What are the implications of environmental problems being socially constructed? Climate change is real. Global warming is real. Sociological research accepts these two things as empirically supported facts of society. Sociologists also hold that some of the most pressing social problems currently facing society are related to climate change and global warming, and that we as sociologists can offer a great deal to understanding the population effects, the demographic trends, the social patterns, and the social effects of changing environmental conditions and our impact on them. Indeed, there exists a burgeoning field of environmental sociology that studies the interactions between societies and their natural environment. This relatively new but extremely important, popular, and growing field focuses on the practical application of sociological research and methods to understand and provide solutions to what could be the most existential threats to society that currently exist: our over-reliance on Earth's non-renewable resources that contribute to its deterioration. The consequences of this range from pollution in both the atmosphere and water to effects on climate such as global warming, as well as the consequences of deforestation and non-renewable resources. And as we might suspect, the impacts of climate change are not felt evenly across societies and populations. The most vulnerable in society will continue to be disproportionately impacted by these social and health consequences. So it's up to sociologists to continue providing research and empirical support for some of the social policies that work to combat climate change. Well, that's it for today, and actually for the entire course. I hope you learned something new about populations, the natural environment, and perhaps most importantly, our impact on climate change and global warming. It has been a wonderful semester despite having to do this entirely online. I look forward to, fingers crossed, getting back into the classroom in the fall and meeting you all in classes in the future. You can find some PowerPoints to help you study for the final exam, which will be completed in the same way as the midterm. There will also be a review PowerPoint added, and I'm sure that will help you study for the final exam. The exam will be open on July 23rd and must be submitted by midnight on July 30th. Please do not forget to submit all of your ReadWatch responses and complete your quizzes no later than midnight on July 23rd. There will be absolutely no exceptions made to these deadlines unless you get formal accommodations. As always, you can reach out to me on Twitter at Derek Krim or by email if you have any questions or concerns. This has been Professor Silva, and for the last time, thank you for tuning into Social Problems.